to the 11th Hayley-Roxanna Crafts quick cross stitch video, where I share information, hints and tips on one area of cross stitch in a short video. In this video I'm focusing on how to do 3/4 stitches on Aida fabric. 3/4 stitches, like other partial stitches, are used by designers to smooth edges and round corners. This is how I show them on my charts. But other designers may show them in a different way, so it is best to consult the instructions before you start stitching. There can also be some variation in how they are constructed. I will just be demonstrating how I usually do them and how I intend them to be done in my designs. A 3/4 stitch is literally a stitch that's 3/4 of your full cross stitch. So this does technically cover half the square on your fabric, which is why some people will refer to these as half stitches, but that can get confusing as there are stitches that are half of a full cross stitch which are also called half stitches. So I prefer the term 3/4 stitches for these, referring to how much of a full cross stitch you are doing. So if on the chart the 3/4 stitch is shown in the bottom left corner of the square like this, to do that on your fabric, you want to come up in the bottom left hole of the corresponding square, and then you want to go down through the centre of that same square, like so, and then you want to come up in the bottom right corner of your square and go down through the top left corner to make the 3/4 of the cross, covering that bottom left corner of your square. Sometimes when piercing the centre of the square, it can be difficult to get your needle through. Giving the needle a sort of little wiggle can help. If you're still having difficulty, just use a needle with a sharper tip to it. If the 3/4 stitch is shown in the bottom right corner of the square on your chart, then you would need to come up through the bottom left corner of the corresponding square on your fabric and go down through the top right hole of the square. So you're completing the long stitch first, and then come up through the bottom right corner of the square and go down through the middle of that square, taking care to go under the stitch that's already there rather than through it. Like so, to give you your 3/4 stitch in the bottom right corner. Alternatively, you can always do the quarter stitch first and then the longer sort of half over to make the 3/4 second. If you find that easier, that's just a personal preference thing. If the 3/4 stitch is shown in the top left corner of the square on your chart, to complete that, you want to come up through the bottom left hole of the corresponding square on your fabric and go down through the top right hole. And then you want to come up through the centre of that square, taking care not to split the thread that goes over the centre that you've already stitched. And then down into the top left corner. Like so. Alternatively, if you do find it difficult to pierce through the centre of the square from the back, you can always do this quarter stitch by coming up in the corner hole first and taking it down through the centre instead. If the 3/4 stitch is shown in the top right corner of the square on your chart, on your fabric, you want to come up through the centre of the corresponding square on your fabric Then take the needle down through the top right hole of that square. Then bring your needle up through the bottom right hole of the square and go down through the top left hole. Like so. Again, if you find it difficult to come up from the back of your fabric through the centre of the square, then this quarter stitch can be done by coming up through the hole first and going down through the centre. Again, it's just personal preference which way you do it, but that is your 3/4 stitch in your top right corner of the square. If a chart shows 2 3/4 stitches in the same square, there are 2 ways to show this on the fabric, depending on personal preference as well as the designer's choice. This is how I prefer to do it. So I actually do both as 3/4 stitches. However, some may prefer to do the dominant colour as the 3/4 stitch, so the stitch of the image that's nearer to the foreground of the design, and then do the other as a 1/4 stitch, like I've done here. Sometimes you may even have 3/4 stitches and 1/4 stitches in the same square. So again, they would be similar to this, depending on which corner each stitch is in. Some people also will only do a 1/4 stitch in place of a 3/4 stitch if there's back stitching over where the long leg of the stitch is. But again, this is a personal preference thing. If you have any questions about 3/4 stitches, please pop them in the comments. In next week's video, I will demonstrate the 3/4 stitches on even weave fabric.